morning, everyone. Um, Thank you for making the time to join us today. Welcome to the Local Energy Codes program webinar on the single-family new construction cost effectiveness analysis for the 2025 code cycle. I am obviously not your usual host, Misty Brusiri, who was pulled away from work today. I'm Adam Zelzen. I work with Misty in the statewide Reach Codes program, and today I'm joined by Ada Shen and Claudia Picatore from Frontier Energy. We're going to walk through the study that they prepared, the objectives, the development and results. Also joined by Neil DeSnow, one of our program's primary consultants, who's also joining us today. Can everybody hear me all right? Just give me a thumbs up just to make sure that good. Okay. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware, we are recording the webinar today, and we'll be sharing both the recording and the presentation materials following the webinar. We'll get those out as soon as we can for anyone who might have missed today's presentation or who would like to kind of go back through some of the materials. Okay, so we'll start today with a few high-level notes from me before we get into the study itself. We'll get into the background of the study to kind of better frame the results. We'll take a look at the single-family building and ADO prototypes that were evaluated in this study and their base case assumptions, along with the efficiency measures that were analyzed. Before we start looking at the results, and then we'll move into some Q&A and discussion before I wrap up with some timelines for our studies and some updates on some of our program resources. So again, just a couple high-level slides to begin with, just to kind of frame the discussion. And the Frontier team will kind of go into this a little bit further. But the 2025 compliance metrics have changed. We now have 4 compliance metrics for new single-family buildings. The TDB metric has been replaced with long-term system cost, or LSC. And the intent here is to kind of give an idea of how the energy and carbon efficiency of building construction will impact the state's grid over the next 30 years. Efficiency LSC includes the performance of the building envelope and its mechanical equipment. The total LSC metric includes the efficiency LSC and the LSC energy from photovoltaic systems, energy storage systems, lighting, demand flexibility, and other plug loads. Source energy, it's more than what's just used in site. This includes like impacts of generation and transmission also. For us, source energy has always kind of acted as a proxy for GHG emissions and emissions reductions. Peak cooling is a new compliance metric, and it's the total annual mechanical cooling site energy expressed in kilowatt hours that occurs at peak hours between 4 and 9 p.m. From the hotter months, from July to November. I think we're all familiar with that peak. And when using the performance compliance approach, up to a 20% increase in peak cooling energy for a proposed design is allowed, compared to the minimally code compliant standard. Beyond 20% is penalized. And peak cooling is applicable to climate zones 4 and 8 through 15. I just kind of wanted to cover quickly kind of a misconception that we've been hearing about the prescriptively compliant single-family building design in the 2025 code. Generally speaking, when we do the cost effectiveness analyses to see what would support a REACH code, we're comparing a proposed building against a standard building design that just meets state requirements. In the 2025 code, the standard design or base code for single family new construction is now a heat pump baseline and for all climate zones. But that does not mean the base code is an all electric design. That is a misconception that we've been hearing. The 2025 base code assumes that the space and water heating are heat pumps, but the models also can include, I mean, they also include stoves and clothes dryers, compliance neutral equipment. These appliances are modeled the same in both the proposed and standard designs. There's no compliance credit nor penalty. And outdoor equipment is not in the model, but can be either fuel source. Okay. Let me just mute someone here. Okay, and lastly, just to kind of pull us out a bit before we get into the finer details of the study, why do we need these cost effectiveness studies? The easy answer is that, well, they're required. To amend the energy code in California, you must determine a policy is cost effective, and these studies are a required component for CEC compliance. But I think that kind of misses the larger point. More broadly, these studies, really help us define what the outside edge of the cost-effective building envelope looks like. We're looking to see how far can we push efficient building design while maintaining cost effectiveness. And we use these results as guidance to help determine, what can work best in each climate zone. And that push can help inform future building code standards. I think we can kind of all agree that the 2025 building code is really robust. And the studies done in previous code cycles has played a role in getting us there. So these studies really provide critical information that needs to be communicated both with your internal colleagues as well as external stakeholders. And it's a really important step to clearly provide, these cost and potential impacts of these proposed policies, and to be able to support them with data. And as these studies look through the lens of climate zones, throughout the state, it really allows us to better identify, local and regional opportunities. We've seen the power of regional coordination, throughout the state, and the role it can play, especially in terms of compliance. So, enough for me. Let's get to the single family study results. Let me stop sharing here. And Claudia, if you want to grab controls.
Sure. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining. I want to make sure this is the right version.
Claudia, I'll give you a second here. I just want to, we have a lot to get through, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions and discussion. But for those questions that aren't super urgent or timely to what's being discussed, we ask that you please just put them in the chat for now, and we'll do our best to get them answered. But if you do have something that really needs to be addressed right away, something that needs immediate clarification, please raise your hand, and we'll get it answered. But again, let's best we can. Let's please hold our questions for the Q&A so we can kind of let our presenters get through their materials.
Thank you. Yeah, I plan to stop at the end of each section to see if there's any questions regarding the actual material I covered, anything that's like unclear. So anything that stops you from understanding what I'm saying. Otherwise, yes, as Adam said, please hold any questions or comments to the end where we'll have a discussion. Okay, so you're all seeing my slide, right?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay. So Adam covered a lot of this already, but these are the topics I'm going to cover. I'm Claudia. I'm with Frontier Energy. I've been here for 10 years, working on various things, but mostly program implementation and reach code development. Okay, And I think you all are very well familiar with Reach Code Basics, but just to, make sure we're all on the same page, the goal is to exceed the energy code, right? Which is known as Title 24, Part 6, energy standards, all that. And you have to demonstrate cost effectiveness, just like we do on the state level. We have to, when we're proposing new energy code measures, we have to demonstrate cost effectiveness. So you have to do that too when you're proposing a REACH code. That's why it's the focus of this presentation. And of course, you have to gain approval from the appropriate agencies. And that's why the REACH code team is here. It's to help you, to support you in adopting and implementing a REACH code and providing resources such as this presentation. Also, if you're unaware, just in case, please do familiarize yourself with the Cost Effectiveness Explorer tool, which is on the REACH code website. It allows you to see housing stocks and estimated energy savings due to particular measures like what we're going to cover today. So you can really explore the kind of code you want to implement. Okay, but back to this particular topic, we are covering single family new construction, which means that it doesn't cover any multifamily, it doesn't cover existing buildings, and we're focusing on compliance and the impacts of compliance, which means that we're not getting into the finer points of legalities or implementation. That's my role from Frontier, okay? So the REACH code team, they offer other support, but this presentation today is limited to what I just mentioned. So this is a follow-up from the preliminary results that I presented back in January. The actual report of those results is posted online on the REACH code team website. And all of this is iterative. It's along the path to the final report, which is going to be shared at the end of April. So the preliminary results were a first stab. What I'm discussing today is based on a refined version of that for basically a draft report, and then it's going to be further refined in a final report that you'll see. Okay, so I mentioned that we don't really touch on the legal considerations, but I'm going to just mention a few things because they're relevant to this analysis that we did. One is that the efficiencies of appliances, some appliances, are federally regulated, and we, California, or any jurisdiction, cannot require any more stringent efficiencies. So you'll see this in the presentation referred to as federal minimums. And you'll also hear here and elsewhere the term preemption. That's what this means. We cannot, it is our ability to require higher efficiencies are preempted by this federal law. The federal law is incorporated into Title 20, which is a California specific regulation. Just FYI. And this includes HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, basically your space conditioning system, and DHW, which is domestic hot water, your water heating system. So, as I'm sure most of you know, these are really big contributors to efficiency, which means that we're very limited in what we can require. And then I also want to mention that, of course, we are in very unusual times from a code community perspective. We have both the still ongoing debate around the gas bans that some jurisdictions have started. Some have succeeded outside of California. But of course, you probably know about the California case in Berkeley where it was shot down. So everyone has to be really careful about that. We also have the new Assembly Bill 130, which places a moratorium on all energy code changes related to single family development. And I know that you all are aware of this and you're working really hard to figure out how you can navigate these. But I just want to mention that this is not the norm. This is new. Okay. I want to go over some basics of energy code. If you know it, great. It'll be a reminder of the fundamentals. But for those who aren't as familiar, it's really important to get these concepts covered and understood. So the energy code, like I said, it's referred to as these various names. It's updated every 3 years. We call that the code cycle. So the 2022 code cycle was the one that was in place up until January 1st of this year, which is the 2025 code cycle. It consists of mandatory measures, which must be met. Can't be traded off, has to be in every project. And then on top of that, you can either choose a prescriptive approach or performance. Prescriptive is exactly what it sounds like. It tells you exactly what is needed in your climate zone. And the performance approach is where you can trade off those prescriptive requirements as long as the compliance scores that result meet or exceed the prescriptive approach. So most builders in reality utilize the performance approach because it's more flexible. But we frame things in analyses like this one, we frame it in terms of prescriptive standards because that is what sets the baseline, okay? The prescriptive approach is minimally compliant. You can go above it, that'd be great. But the prescriptive approach represents the minimum standards that must be met. So when I say something like prescriptively required, it doesn't mean that it's actually required. It means that you must meet or exceed the compliance that results from that requirement. I hope that's clear. Okay, so as Adam mentioned, there are a few really significant changes in the 2025 code cycle. One is the dual heat pump baseline, which prescriptively requires that space heating and water heating are heat pumps for all climate zones. In the previous code cycle, 2022, there were differences in what was prescriptively required for space heating and water heating based on the climate zone. It was basically one or the other, okay? So now, again, you don't have to have a heat pump for all these things, but you have to meet the performance standards that are equivalent to having a heat pump for both space heating and water heating. Another major change, like Adam said, is the compliance metrics. So he talked about peak cooling, which is significant, but it doesn't impact this study. So I'm not really going to cover it. But the other metrics that are relevant include the replacement of EDR with LSC. EDR is energy design rating. LSC is long-term system cost. EDR was a sort of unitless metric meant to compare. It was meant to be a like for like comparison. But long-term system cost is a little bit more straightforward. It is meant to convey the cost of the energy system over time. So that includes generation, energy generation, distribution, peak times, all the things that go into the complex world of energy, especially electricity. But I will mention, in 2022, EDR included efficiency, total, and source. Now, with LSC, it applies to efficiency and total, but it does not apply to source. Source is its own metric. And these changes are made to not only enable compliance, but more importantly, to properly weigh the impacts of the various things that contribute to these metrics, which we'll go over, and how they meet the goals of the Energy Commission. All right, so here's, Here are the three kind of breakdowns, which I mentioned in the previous slide. Source energy, efficiency, and total. They more or less cover the same things that they did back when it was EDR. Basically, source energy is a metric for greenhouse gas emissions. It takes into account the fuel that is used to power the systems that you see here. Efficiency is meant to cover, as you might imagine, the actual energy savings of particular systems relative to similar systems, right? So a more energy efficient wall insulation. And then the total is sort of a combination of the two. It's meant to, these three components are weighting things differently, as I mentioned. So although it might seem like there's a lot of overlap, they have different goals in terms of compliance metrics. Okay, so anyone who was around for the initial presentation knows that we chose one particular compliance metric as our focus, that is the efficiency LSC, because basically it has more of an impact now in terms of driving electrification and energy efficiency. This is partly because the metrics themselves have changed, but also because of that dual heat pump baseline that I mentioned earlier. It basically, they're big contributors to your footprint, right? Your energy footprint. So when those are prescriptively required to be heat pumps, it really gets rid of a lot of options for electrification. So cumulatively, the effect is that efficiency LSC has more impact in terms of compliance metrics for driving electrification. So when we talk about results, we're going to be focusing on the compliance margin of this particular component, this particular efficiency metric. As a reminder, this is what it covers, right? It covers envelope measures, equipment. It's not covering things like renewable energy and batteries. Okay, now we're going to talk about prototypes, which is a little bit in the weeds, so I'm going to go over it very briefly. But the importance of this is that these are the models used in the analysis software that represent the baseline, the prescriptive standards. So when we make changes, we are asking the software to tell us the impact of these changes versus the prescriptive baseline. The single family prototype is the long used prototype by the CEC representing more traditional single-family home. There are these two prototypes that you see here, but for the purposes of this analysis and previous ones, we sort of combine them. We put them together into an average of sorts, but instead of a 50-50 weighting, as is usually the case with an average, we weight them according to the estimated prevalence in new construction. Meaning, because we have 57% for this two-story prototype, it's slightly more common based on our analysis than this one-story 2,100 square foot prototype. So this is all factored into this 2,400 square foot prototype that I'll be referring to in this study. The other prototype that we're looking at is the ADU, or accessory dwelling unit, additional dwelling unit, the small home prototype. And this was a recent addition. It was explored in the last code cycle, but was only recently adopted as an official prototype by the CEC. And as you can see, the first table labeled CEC, it describes the characteristics of their prototype. But we, in the last code cycle and the last analysis like this one, had looked at a larger version of this because it was before the CEC prototype was developed, and it was based on research from UC Berkeley on ADUs. So just FYI that it's similar, but not the same as the prototype used by the CEC. In any case, the ADU is defined by being on the same parcel as a single family development, but detached. If it's attached, then it's not considered new construction. And this is a table of the characteristics of each prototype, or I'm sorry, each prototype with the exception of this orange box around the PV system. That's the only difference for the ADU, okay? So we're not even talking about PV today. So basically, you can just continue with the understanding that the characteristics are assumed to be the same between single family and ADU, okay? One other thing I want to point out are these HVAC efficiencies. I mentioned before preemption. These avoid preemption because they are not higher than the federal standards. So you don't have to worry about that in this analysis. We're looking at things other than efficient appliances. All right, so what are we looking at? We looked at measures that had a impact on the efficiency LSC score. And then if they did, we went further to see if they were cost effective, which is of course a requirement of REACH codes to be adopted. And cost effectiveness, by the way, is a state level metric. It's not cost effective for the builder, it's cost effective for the state. But we'll also look at on-bill cost effectiveness, which is a similar thing, but for the homeowner. But I digress. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Okay, so these measures, they're all, in terms of the information presented here, they're all for the 2,400 square foot prototype, the combined single family prototype. One is high efficiency windows, which means that we have a decreased U factor. Oh, I'm sorry. And then an increased solar heat gain coefficient. So some of the basics are shown in this graphic below, but what I want to point out is that the prescriptive the difference between prescriptive and proposed for each climate zone. And the reason there are some blue text is because those are recent changes in the 2025 code compared to 2022. But in all cases, we're analyzing a measure that has a 0.24 U factor for all climate zones and a 0.5 SHGC for all climate zones. We also looked at reduced infiltration, which is basically the opposite of building leakage, air leakage. And this ACH 50 value is basically a measure of that leakage. It's saying 3 ACH 50 air changes per hour at 50 pascals pressure is the standard assumption, but we're going to increase that tightness to 5. This does require verification by an ECC provider, which is the new name for HERS providers, basically. They're the ones who verify certain measures on site. We also looked at buried radial ducts. So here's a graphic of what it means to have your ducts buried. And it's normal, perhaps, this first image on the left. And then if you have things partially buried or fully buried, the images to the right, it just basically, it means that it's covered by attic or ceiling insulation. But then the radial part is the image shown on the left, where the top is radial. The bottom is the more standard trunk and branch design. Radial is more efficient. It's a more direct route to the areas you're serving with your space conditioning system. Has reduced energy losses because of it. Smaller ducts, which are more efficient. And in this analysis, the buried radial duct measure that you see here always exists with this other measure, the ceiling insulation that you see here. The ceiling insulation is, of course, what is basically this pink in the image up here with buried ducts. So the ceiling insulation is basically either R60 or R49, depending on what the prescriptive requirement is for your climate zone, which is either 30 or 38. I'll also note that this duct insulation, which you can see as the sort of gray outer circle of these duct images, in some cases it's R6, in some cases it's R8. And in climate zones where R6 is prescriptively required, we added R8 as a component of this combined measure. Buried ducts, increased insulation, radial design, and then increased duct insulation if applicable. Another measure we looked at is compact hot water distribution. It's a credit in the energy code, which basically just states the specifics of what needs to be met. And basically, I know these images are not very clear, but you can basically tell based on the red lines and the blue lines that the image on the left is standard, arguably, and the image on the right is compact. The lines are smaller. It's all about minimal piping, right? Because the less piping you have, the less heat loss you have when you're delivering hot water to the end uses. And I'll, to be clear, some of these things, well, I mentioned this with the duct insulation. If it's prescriptively required, we don't count it in a particular climate zone. This is the case with compact hot water distribution as well. So in climate zones 1 and 16, this is prescriptively required. So we don't analyze it for those climate zones. Oh, geez. I pulled up the wrong presentation. Sorry, guys. This measure, VCHP, is a variable capacity heat pump. And this graphic kind of shows what that means. So the prescriptive standard is now a regular split heat pump. So it meets the federal requirements for efficiency minimums. And it's a split heat pump, meaning that there's an outdoor unit and an indoor unit, but it's ducted and it's single speed, meaning, or single stage. As you can see here, it's either on or off. It's 0 or 100% functionality. You might have a two-stage where there's one other middle ground, but it's still one of 3 different operational levels. Variable capacity, as shown in the bottom here, is that it has a range of operative capacities, meaning that it can fluctuate with the needs of the house and it's more efficient. It's not an all or nothing type of system. But also, in this case, we're looking at a ductless variable capacity system. They're also called mini splits, by the way. You might see that as a reference, a ductless mini split, but it's the same thing as this. And please note, this is only analyzed for the ADU. The single family, we looked at all the measures I talked about before this. And here, this is just for the ADU. And it's the only thing analyzed for the ADU. Oh. All right. Here are the costs of the measures. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I just want to point out that, first of all, the costs represent, again, like the performance, it's sort of the average for the 2400 combined prototype. And the only exception is this last section for the VCHP, which is only for ADUs. And then I also want to point out that the second to last column, labeled first, is the first incremental cost, meaning first year. It's what you pay. It's basically the raw initial cost of the measure. But then the lifetime cost incorporates any future maintenance or replacement, and it also incorporates financing terms, because it's assumed that when you buy a home, all these measures are incorporated into the mortgage terms. Okay, so it includes interest, loan terms, other financial metrics that will be detailed in the report. But basically, it's not simply a extrapolation, a multiplication, I should say, of the first cost. It's a little more nuanced. And I should also mention that lifetime, in this case, is 30 years, okay? That's the measure lifetime that we assume. And then if something is different, as you'll see with the VCHP measure, we treat it differently. I'm also not going to go over this very much, but basically these are the kind of representative utility rates that are used when analyzing the utility savings, which you'll see in the results, and also the on-bill cost effectiveness, which you'll see in the results and we'll discuss later. I'll also mention that in these lifetime utility costs and the on-bill cost effectiveness, which you can think of as utility bill cost effectiveness, we account for expected escalation in utility rates. Now, For those of you who are around for the 2022 report, we presented two different scenarios. One was a high escalation rate scenario, one was a moderate escalation, both referring only to gas prices. The electricity prices had much more moderate expected increases. So because of the dual heat pump baseline and because things are now so much more electricity focused in terms of even just the standard code, the escalation rates that are gas centric are not quite as relevant. So in the report, you'll see that we assume only one escalation rate as opposed to 2022, and it's based on the newer LSC, long-term system cost, estimates for these escalations. Again, more important for gas than electricity. So this is just the, I guess, FYI for those who will see the report and wonder what we're assuming in terms of the future costs of utilities, that lifetime factor, right? Okay. So with all that, that's what we do when we're analyzing, right? We're taking all those things into consideration. We're looking at individual measures that we think will have not only energy savings, but good compliance impacts, higher scores, and are cost effective, again, to the state. That's the LSC, the long-term system cost. By system, we mean the state energy system. We also look at on-bill because it's a very important metric because that's what the consumer faces. But in terms of adopting a REACH code, your requirement is to prove LSC cost effectiveness. So let's look at the results. Okay. Oh. For single family, I explained all the measures we looked at, and we chose either the one or the many measures per climate zone that came together to give the favorable compliance impact that we wanted, right? The high enough margin that would drive your goals. So in some cases, it's one measure, like climate zone 16. Oh, I'm sorry, like 6 through 10, as you can see here. In other cases, it's a combination, as you can see with other climate zones. For the ADU, we only looked at the VCHP measure. That was all we needed. And I'm sorry, I should have stated earlier, for the VCHP measure, what we're comparing it to is a ducted regular heat pump. Both are minimal efficiency, no preemption issues, no high efficiency equipment issues. It's simply ducted versus ductless and variable capacity versus not single speed. The latter, the base case, the single speed ducted system, is what is prescriptively required. Whether that reflects actual building practices is something that is not addressed here. But the fact that ductless VCHP, it just makes more sense for ADUs because why run ducting when it's such a small space? It's arguable that that's a very practical solution. So that's why we focus just on the VCHP, that and its very favorable numbers, which you'll see in a bit. All right. Electricity savings. The orange-ish is single family, the blue is ADU. As you'll see in several of these results, climate zone 16 is like literally off the charts. So I cut it off so that we can see the other climate zone results better, but I noted where it goes up to, as you can see there. greenhouse gas savings. And this is just to give you an idea, right? In the final report that will be published, you'll see the exact values. They'll also be available in that cost effectiveness explorer that I mentioned earlier. First year utility cost savings. The savings for the customer in that first year. And this is, again, so the ADU is just that VCHP measure. The single family is that one or multiple measures that I showed you in the table. That's what these results represent. Lifetime utility cost savings. So that is similar to the first year, but it adjusts based on those escalation rates I talked about, along with other financial considerations like discounting. Incremental costs. So I showed you the costs in the previous slide. Those were basically these first year costs, the gray. But then when you put that into a lifetime or 30-year metric, it is incorporating, like I said, this assumption that it's being wrapped up into the home mortgage. So you have interest, a loan lifetime. Okay, so it's a special consideration. It's not just 30 times the first year cost. As you can see in some of these climate zones, the incremental cost is negative, which means that it's cheaper than the prescriptive assumption, which is always great. Here are the incremental costs for ADU. They are all negative. So that's the favorable numbers that I mentioned before. When comparing a ductless system to a ducted system for an ADU, it's cheaper in all cases. It doesn't matter in all cases meaning no matter what capacity heat pump you specify. You're saving a lot on just that avoiding ducting costs. So it's just a matter of how much you're saving. So you'll see here and also in the report, any negative number is shown as like this red value. It almost evokes negativity, but in this case, it's positive. Right, cost effectiveness, which is the meat of what you need when trying to implement a REACH code. All right, so we have two different metrics for cost effectiveness. One is net present value, as you're seeing here, which is basically taking this 30-year lifetime and presenting it in today's dollars. And then you have it in terms of on bill, which is, like I said, the customer-centric version. It reflects what they pay in their utility bills or what they save. But 2025 LSC, long-term system cost, is the cost to the statewide system. Okay, so the CEC, the California Energy Commission, is the state agency responsible for these codes. So they have to look at it in terms of statewide impacts, including system costs. So that's why we have two different metrics. So in all cases, as you can see by this the golden bars, it is positive in terms of NPV 2025 LSC. For on bill, the results vary. They're mostly higher. And as you'll see, this is something that some of you may be painfully familiar with. When it comes to the non-IOU, the non-investor-owned utilities, the municipal utilities, including CPAU and SMUD, they have lower electricity rates, which is great for customers, and it helps drive efficiency and electrification. But when you talk about these formulas, this math, it looks worse because even though the savings are amplified when rates are higher. I hope that makes sense. If not, let's talk about it after. Here's the same thing for the ADU. You'll notice that all of them are positive. All of them have better cost effectiveness on bill than 2025 LSC. And that's because of the utility cost savings associated with the energy efficiency of the VCHP system. And very importantly, the lower costs compared to the baseline. It's cheaper to install a ductless system than a ducted system for an ADU, for a small home. Now, another cost effectiveness metric is the B to C ratio, or the benefit to cost ratio, probably something that most people are pretty familiar with on a conceptual level. In this case, the benefit is the cost savings, either to the customer or to the energy system. And the cost is the cost of the measure over that 30-year lifetime. So as you can see, these more pale bars that span the whole range, they're basically, you can consider them infinite ratios, meaning that in cases like the ADU, where the cost is negative, so the ratio doesn't even apply, right? It's just like continuous savings. So that's what's reflected here in the ADU. That VCHP measure is all benefit, basically. For the single family, which is shown on the left, you have some climate zones where it's a wash, like the ADU, but in other cases you have, anywhere from 0.75 to near 3 in terms of the benefit over the cost. Now, that was on bill, again, which utilizes utility costs. It's consumer-centric, homeowner-centric. LSC is the analog on a statewide level for the VC. So for LSC, that benefit to cost ratio is similar, but a little bit, first of all, more favorable in the single family when for these pale infinite bars, but also a little higher in terms of the ratios for other climate zones. ADU remains the same. They're basically negative costs, incremental costs, meaning that it's cheaper to install a ductless system. Therefore, this ratio is infinite, like I said. Okay, so this is the main results that I want to share, because cost effectiveness is a requirement, which we just went through, but this is sort of the bottom line. It's what target margin would you set in your reach code? So we looked at LSC efficiency only, and that target is basically the rounded down version, rounded down to the nearest integer. So it's nice and clean and easy, 5%, not 5.2%, of the LSC margin that would result from the measures that we presented, right? So, for example, climate zone 3, the measures we presented, which are shown in that table I showed earlier, would reach this 8.8 perhaps LSE efficiency margin. And so rounding down, the target would be an 8%. That would be your reach code requirement. You must reach 8% LSE efficiency. Now, I know this table isn't very clear in this, but just note that the blue bars, the source energy margin, is not what we're looking at in this analysis. It's included here to show you that it is not as impactful in driving efficiency and electrification as these LSC efficiency metrics. And so they're not additive. You don't add the blue to this peach sorbet color. They're different, right? So this, even though it looks like for climate zone 3, it looks like it's reaching 11%. It's in fact just above 2% because it's between 9 and 11. Sorry about that. I hope it's not a deterrent for you really understanding what's being displayed here. And so I broke them up. This is the same situation, but for the second half of climate zones, just so it's more clearly visible. Oh, and these percentages that are listed here on the left, they're just the numbers showing these black bars, which are the targets, because I wanted to make that really clear. And here are the results for the ADU. They're inherently lower magnitude because ADUs are smaller. They have less energy use and less energy savings. Same thing. Yeah. There might be some changes in the final report. We are looking at refining some of the costs, possibly looking at measure variations. So we're going to continue to explore that. And otherwise, we're going to release the final report as the next step, the final step. And that the data that informs that report is going to be published in the Cost Effectiveness Explorer tool so that you can have full access to all the results and play with it as you wish. That's it.
Thank you, Claudia. Fantastic presentation. I imagine that is a challenge to get all of that into a handful of slides. So thank you so much for that. Okay, now we'll open this up for general Q&A and discussion. Anybody want to kick us off?
I'm looking at the chat right now and
Pretty quiet for this group. Rita, please.
I have a question. Claudia, could you maybe talk a little bit more or go over again the bit about the detached or attached ADUs? I'm not sure I completely followed that. That would be helpful for me. Thank you.
sure. So when it's attached to the house, the primary dwelling unit, it's considered an addition, which mostly follows new construction code, but it is considered different in terms of code. Does that help?
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Bo, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. I put one in the chat and I also have another one. So I'm wondering if battery storage was evaluated, even though the federal tax credit is gone.
It wasn't mainly because of the changes to the compliance metrics, where source energy is basically less impactful than efficiency LSC, but also because it's historically been not cost effective. So it's something that we could look at potentially, but based on our experience, wasn't worthwhile for these preliminary results.
Okay. Yeah, maybe in the future it could be looked at because there's a chance some jurisdictions might be interested. Because I know of some that will require backup gas generators just for resiliency, and it'd be great if they could be convinced to go battery storage instead. And then a comment and sort of a question about the metrics. I saw on your slide that the source energy margin was much lower, but I wonder if it still might be a good metric to use for the reach code, at least in some cases, because even if it's small, it might be still harder to overcome if somebody puts in gas equipment, so that it might encourage electrification more than we might think. Also, it's the metric that I think was used in the last reach code. So if people have a reach code and they're thinking about AB 130 and they want to keep their reach code as similar to how it was before, if the metrics are more similar, that might help. Just an edge case.
Yeah, no, great point. As I understand, a lot of the reach codes that are striving to move forward despite AB 130, they're using the exception that's really the climate goals. So I'm not sure that the metric itself matters, but we've also seen that any change to the code is basically frowned upon in terms of AB 130. So yes, so you might be right that for that reason alone, you might want to stick to source margins. And yeah, that could be effective. Typically speaking, though, the higher the margin that you set as your target, the harder it is to comply without doing the measures that you want. But it's all relative, as I think Einstein said.
We do have a couple questions in the chat from Ryan. What was the square footage of the single family home and the ADU?
The single family is basically an average of 2,100 square foot home and 2,700. So it's referred to as a 2,400 square foot prototype. And the ADU was 625 square feet instead of the 500 square foot official prototype in CC.
Thank you. So does that mean for a reach code option, it can only apply to single family homes 2,400 square feet and larger?
No. These are just examples of what you can adopt and the impact they would have. You'll see in actually the cost effectiveness explorer tool that I mentioned, how it'll have the full data set. You'll see the individual 2,100 and 2,700 square foot results. But even then, that does not at all dictate what you can require.
Okay.
It's just an example.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ryan, thank you for jumping in and clarifying your question. For anybody else, as I read these chat questions, please jump in if I'm not encapsulating your question. Evan asked, will the LSC compliance margins be published in the final report, as they are not listed in the preliminary report?
They are? Shoot. They will definitely be in the final report. If they're not in the preliminary report, can't imagine why.
Neil here. The data sets are also available for download from the LSC, the localenergycodes.com website. So the full data set is there, and the Explorer should have the data as well. Explorer has
Yes.
it in a friendlier manner than the data set.
Yeah, this is Jasmine Kraus with the Explorer. We don't have the preliminary data uploaded quite yet, but we're working on that. Um, I believe we normally just show results in the Explorer for the average 2,400 square foot
Oh,
prototype.
I'm sorry. Okay.
No worries. But Ryan, it's expected that this is kind of a model to use and that, depending on your home size and individual, unique changes to homes, that it's not going to be a one-to-one match, but that they're average and kind of good enough to get an idea and use for your policy.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Bo.
Thanks, Alex. I have a different comment about the rate escalation. I understand that it's not as important with this study since the major equipment is all electric in the baseline and in the measure cases. But if we could, it would be great to keep consistent with other reports and use the IEPR rate forecast for electricity and gas, just in case anybody attempts to use data from the report for other means.
Let me make sure I understand you. So, in our analysis, we assumed that one of the escalation rates, the 2025 LSC higher gas escalation. So that's already in the results. Are you saying that you want to see the results for the older CPUC en banc escalation assumptions?
Well, did you use LSC data in order to set the rate escalation for the on-bill calculations? I thought that's what you said
Yes.
you did.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
sorry, they only apply to on-bill.
Yeah, so my thought is just that whenever we have an on-bill calculation, it would be great, it would be ideal if we could use the same source for rate escalation as we do in other reports, which I think would be the IEPR or whatever the latest is that the state has come out with, as opposed to the LSC values, which I know are from the state, but those are not realistic for a forecast of rates for customers into the future, I don't think.
Okay, well, I would love to know more about these more realistic rates that you're talking about. We've historically used only the two that I mentioned. Kelly?
I think this is something we're going to have to discuss. I do not think that it is in the best interest of the jurisdictions to delay the release of the information because the nuance between these two options is slender from my understanding. So I do think for future work and updates that this is a great comment now that the IPER has been updated and approved. So, but it is a pretty significant decision to change the escalation rates for our cost effectiveness reports and is something that should be treated across all moving forward. So we should consider this and think about that for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Making note of that.
Do we have any other questions? Well, why don't I'll go through these last couple slides and anybody can add something to the chat. We can kind of circle back. Okay. So wrapping up. Again, thank you, Claudia. Great presentation. Appreciate you taking the time to explain a very complicated topic to all of us in a short amount of time. That is truly a challenge.
Thanks.
So big takeaways, in summary, I think, and this is a greatly oversimplified view. But for standard sized homes, the team was able to identify cost-effective, non-preempted package of measures that exceeds the minimum state requirements. And as Claudia noted, the focus is on the efficiency compliance metric, leveraging the superior performance of heat pumps, with the exception being the larger single-family homes in climate zones 4 and 12. and great numbers for ADUs, in all climate zones for both on Ville and LSC. Again, greatly oversimplified, but that's kind of the high level takeaway for me. So what are some of the next steps? This is really when the ball gets rolling. Now that we have some of the data, I think it begins with understanding your existing policy goals and objectives. This is the time to look at your climate action plans, sustainability strategies, energy plans, and the like. These documents, can really guide your initial direction. We've said this in the past, but it seems more important than ever. Consult your city attorney. To understand the impacts of AB 130 and whether you're eligible for some of its exceptions. We are not lawyers. We do not offer legal advice. And so that this is a critical conversation to have early on. You want to start to talk to your building officials and planning departments to review new housing plans. Do you have new housing development coming online soon that you'd like to capture with the local ordinance? The policy adoption process takes time, and you want to get a better understanding of future builds as soon as you can. And so those are conversations worth having early. And probably most importantly, start reaching out to stakeholders. To begin the conversation now with them. You want to better understand their concerns. You want to understand that now to better shape your own policy. It's really a critical step on the way to policy adoption that, unfortunately, we've seen the consequences of it not being prioritized. And similarly, we've seen great success when all parties are kind of brought along, through the process. So as you go through that process, our program has lots of resources to help you along the way. We're always available to answer your questions. All of our cost effectiveness studies and the REACH Code resources can be found at localenergycodes.com on our resources page. And we know there's a lot of data in these studies and they cover the entire state, and it can be a bit overwhelming at times looking through the tables. But we realize that you're more than likely only interested in one or two climate zones, for your own jurisdiction. And our Claudia mentioned this, our Cost Effectiveness Explorer is a really great tool, that cuts through all of that statewide data and will show you only the results that are relevant, to your jurisdiction. So you don't have to go through all those tables and figure out, what's relevant for you. Jasmine, I appreciate the update. I know the Explorer team is working on importing this data now. We do expect that in the next few weeks or so. I'll drop a link in the chat to our sites container for our residential construction resources. That includes the single family new construction memo and study data that was discussed today, along with the model ordinance language. The staff report, presentation materials, checklists, and policy summary, they'll be up in the next few weeks. We'll get that up as soon as possible.
Adam, let me add that because this is it's a process, right, to get to the final results that we're going to officially publish.
Indeed.
The report that's posted online has slightly different results than you saw here today.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to look at our publication timelines for our other studies, we really did our best to kind of prioritize them as you requested in some of our polling we did with you guys last summer. Like Claudia just mentioned, the memo is up on our site along with the preliminary data results. Final report is expected by the end of April. The multifamily new construction memo, we expect that towards the end of the month. And then we're looking at mid-April for the non-res new construction and the existing multifamily. And then cool roofs is TBD at this point. Any more questions in the chat? Doesn't look like any. Well, we're kind of wrapping up a little bit early today. I just want to thank everyone for making the time to come and join us. Again, please keep an eye on our website, localenergycodes.com, for updates to all of our resources. And there's also an opportunity for you to send questions and comments our way. We really appreciate all the feedback so we can better help build the program to meet everyone's needs. Thank you so much, Claudia, for taking the time today to explain this to us. And thank you, everyone.